There are a lot of sorceries in Elden Ring, 70 of them, I counted, but you only have 10 memory slots to work with at once. And I'll be honest, if you asked me which one is the best sorcery, well, it'd be hard not to say everyone! Because honestly, they're all really fun, they're all unique, they all have a lot going for them, and they're all powerful enough to get by with, right, if you take a liking to any in particular. But today's not about the fact that I love all my sorcery children equally, it's about time deciding which one's the favourite and having all of the others grow up knowing that they're not quite as loved. Or something like that, I don't know, my childhood was incredible. Anyway, today then, these are the 7 best sorceries in Elden Ring. If you could only use 7 sorceries to fill your 10 memory slots, because yes, a couple of them take more than one slot, these would be them. And believe me, a lot of testing, comparing, and experimenting went into this, but I am pretty happy with this list. There are a lot that can be argued, but I think this is as close as definitive as we're gonna get. Oh, and if you don't have or know where to get any of the sorceries that I am going to talk about today, well, I will link a series of guides down below, which very quickly detailed go through how to get them all. And while I would normally insert the how and where into something like this, it's already quite the beefy talk without that, and I don't want to bloat it too much, as I imagine if you're looking up the best kind of set of sorceries to have on, you're aware of what the options are and probably have most of them. First up, Comet Azur. This is either one of the worst sorceries in the game or the absolute pinnacle, depending on if you're doing the strat or not. Drink that infinite FP, a wondrous physic, blast off a 12-second plus laser, do 1 billion damage, one-shot the boss, wipe your hands clean, and know that you're better than all of those filthy barbarians that feel the need to hold a weapon in their hands. But the thing is, even if we're ignoring that situation where it is clearly the best, the actual damage it does is really respectable, and even if you're just using it, draining your FP bar, having a cerulean tears, using it, draining your FP bar, it's still fine, right? But I cannot ignore Comet Azur for its potential to be, well, let's be honest, arguably the single greatest boss-killing tool, not just in a sorcerer's arsenal, but in the game. I don't need to go into this too much, but I will also give you some options for if you don't want Comet Azur and its 3 memory slot allowance. Following that then, Terra Magica. Yes, this is a combo piece with Comet Azur, but even without it, it is absolutely fantastic. Terra Magica gives you a 35% damage bump when you are in it. Well, your magic damage, of course. Now, this damage increase is applied when damage is applied to an enemy. So you can fire a sorcery, then jump in the zone you placed earlier, and then it will retroactively power up the sorcery already flying through the air. You can also poke it through boss fog walls if you cast it hugging it and then step through and stay close to where you just stepped through. So there's a neat little bit of utility there. You can also cast sorceries, then cast Terra Magica, and if the sorcery hasn't hit yet, if it's a slow moving one, well then you are good to go. In any case, it stacks with all of the other multipliers, and it's not reduced in PvP, it's still 35%. Now, granted, it is indiscriminate in who it buffs, so if you're facing an enemy sorcerer, well, they're going to be able to use it too, but against someone who isn't using magic damage, just putting this down and playing around it is going to give you an appreciable increase to your Essentially, it is too big of a buff to be ignored, and is actually the single greatest increase in damage from one thing that doesn't just go away after a single attack, so that's really impressive. Next up then, we have Ranni's Dark Moon. This is here not for the damage that it does. It's quite slow to cast, it's got good tracking, and yeah, it does do good damage, but it's incredibly expensive, and if it was just for the damage, it would be one of the worst sorcerers in the game. But what it does is, for a minute after hitting the target, reduces the target's magic resistance by 30%, which is obviously massive. That cannot go ignored, and honestly, it's how you should be opening any single fight against any boss that you can get this off against. And then when it runs out, well, reapply the debuff. In PvP, it's obviously really bad, and a few of the sorceries that I'll be going over today are there because of their PvP application. I'm essentially trying to create the perfect, never need to change it 10 memory slot usage, but that's, you know, you don't need to commit to that. You can swap and change at every grace, of course, for every situation, but I kind of want to capture the best essence, the best overall toolkit, you know? And being able to apply such a debuff to enemies is insanely useful. Start with a Ranni's Dark Moon, get Terra Magica down, and suddenly you're swinging the damage in your favor by 60% or so. It really is quite effective. So that needs to be here. Then we have the highest damage melee and ranged sorceries, the highest efficiency, the most potent to spam. In the range camp we have Night Comet. Only, however, when you have Staff of Loss in your other hand to give it a 30% bump. I've done an entire video going through the maths on this, but it turns it into the most efficient damage per second range sorcery in the game, and will absolutely melt anything that you can chain cast it against. And because it's an invisible sorcery, enemies don't try and dodge it, so none of that annoying rolling left and right as they just weave through everything that you fire at them. They'll just tank it in the face, and it's just incredibly useful. Pierces through enemies, through shields. It's a really, really solid addition, full of utility, and thanks to a Staff of Loss power stance with your actual casting staff, becomes the most potent ranged default I'm just gonna lob glintstone glob at you sorcery in the game, and definitely belongs on any toolkit. Its melee counterpart then, Carian Slicer. This is the single highest damage to FP ratio in the entire game, sorcery speaking. It's ludicrous. It is so quick, it passes through shields, it's incredibly hard to trade with in PvP because it's so quick and still does so much damage. It's really, really obnoxious, and it is just full of utility. It is one of the best general level clearing sorceries, again because it's so cheap for how effective that it is, and if you can just get a good full stamina bar of spamming it back and forth on a boss, even an endgame one, you just absolutely melt their health for very little FP cost. Obviously there is big boomier spells, but this one is an absolute workhorse powerhouse, and again, you literally cannot do more damage per point of FP faster than Carian Slicer. It's just melee and short range, and that has to be taken into account. And the fact that you can cast this at the end of a sprint to do a running, more lunging, further reaching version of it is just extra delicious utility on top. But it also doubles up as a utility to let you skip casting into a much heavier, slower spell. As I went over in my sorcery tips and tricks, which I will link down below, if you are slicing along with the Carian Slicer, you can switch mid-chain to our next contender, Adula's Moonblade, and go straight into it, skipping the startup animation and providing a really strong mix-up surprise for your opponents in PvP, or just controlling your spell burst output against a boss. But then Adula's Moonblade itself, which honestly I think is in contention for best non-niche sorcery in the game, is just spectacular. The damage to FP is excellent, the actual damage is excellent, and the fact it is a double hit with a ranged component but also a big sweeping melee arc, and it also applies Frostbite incredibly quickly, only taking 2-3 swings against most enemies for that big burst of damage, and then making them take 20% more damage, or more accurately lower the resistances by 20%. It's just phenomenal. You need to have an access to Frost as a sorcerer because Frost as a status is second only to Bleed. Most things are second to Bleed, so that's not really that much of a negative to say, and this is by far the best Frost sorcery, and easily at minimum in the top 3 sorceries in the game. It is effective, it is powerful, it is a huge range, it is relatively quick, and it just gets the job done. And also in PvP, the extra range blast that comes off it is fantastic for roll catching people. Then finally we have Stars of Ruin, our other legendary sorcerer, this time the Lusat edition. This is an interesting one. Obviously it can be charged so it can benefit from Godfrey if you are running it, but it's exceptionally useful for fast moving dodgy enemies because so many fast tracking projectiles. But It's not here for its PvE usage. It's fine against bosses, it is. It does a lot of damage, it's fairly quick to cast, it is expensive for what it is, though obviously got better when it got made cheaper in the patch, but it's just good, right? It's strong, there are other options you can use against enemies in most situations. It's here because of PvP, and I'm trying to do the most well-rounded set of sorceries, and of course I have to include being invaded, or dueling, or doing invading yourself. This thing is spectacular, and honestly, is probably the single best sorcery in the game for PvP. It is nearly impossible to avoid every single hit of this, as such you will always catch people as you blast it off. And really, just spamming Stars of Ruin at an enemy player is one of the most obnoxious and hard to deal with things in the game. It's so potent and so irritating for the person that is receiving said blasting that it kind of feels unfair. It's probably the most unfair thing in the game, if that makes sense. It's not bugs, it's not an exploit, it's not doing more damage than it should, it's working as intended, but the way that it's working makes it one of the best PvP tools going. It's just fantastically powerful, useful, and in every situation will just make your ranged threat that much better. I really can't think of a better sorcery to just throw out against an enemy. The others you want to catch people with, you want to play mind games, you want to wait for the right moment, you want to roll catch them, you want to trade with them. This is just the pure, I am in range of them, I am targeting them, I'm just going to spam Stars of Ruin, and they can't really do anything until they eventually get to me, and then I'll follow it with my next option. It's just truly great. So that's kind of the main kit. That takes up your 10 memory slots, that's all good. If you don't want Comet Azur, well, that gives us 3 more memory slots. What I would quickly recommend for it is Shard Spiral. Shard Spiral is insane. Against big, slow-moving bosses, it does ludicrous damage for the cast. It can also be charged, so God freeze, and it's just wonderful. It quite literally bores holes through things. If you are in the right situation, this is one of the most potent, deadly boss-killing tools you have in your arsenal, and it's so effective. It's fairly niche, which is why it didn't get on the main list, but when you open up more slots, well, I think having Shard Spiral is actually quite good. The slow moving works in its advantage, and you can really stack them up and just watch bosses melt. Then I would put on Carian Piercer, a fantastic tool for roll catching people in PvP. The fact that you can do it quickly or charge it for a little bit of a mix-up that takes longer, the range is deceptively massively long, and in PvE, well, you can use it to chain stagger as it does massive poise damage from, again, really quite far away. It really is quite useful. That final slot essentially is up to you. It's your wild card, it's whatever you would like. Loretta's Greatbow or Mastery aren't the worst options for the range. Something like Fear's Mist maybe is great for draining, but this one I kind of want to leave it to whatever you think's fun, whatever you think's flavorful, whatever you have a good time with, because honestly the rest of the slots have got you covered in any given situation you could find yourself in, so for this one, just kind of go crazy. Oh, I realize that was a lot to talk about in a short amount of time, but I can assure you a lot has gone into this in the background to make sure these are the prime choices for the most complete, well-rounded sorcery build, or indeed use of those 10 memory slots, and I hope it helps you out if you've not been using any of these. For now, though, like if you enjoyed this, subscribe for more. Let me know if you'd like a specific sorcery in PvP type talk, guide, spells, or indeed boss killing, or something more nichely focused, because I'd be happy to do that as opposed to this more general thing. But for now, please consider supporting the future of this channel on Patreon down below. It means the world, and it does keep us going. And until we meet again, a goodbye.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.